Okay, there we go. They was even more official. I'm David Levy, and I'm chair of the Lynchburg Electoral Board. As is we are calling the meeting to order, and we are starting with a pledge of allegiance to I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Next, we have our introductions, and we will start. Yes.
Hi, I'm Dan Pence. I'm the General Registrar, City of Lynchburg.
I'm Nancy Davis, Deputy Registrar. Trish Jones, Deputy Registrar. Betty Gibbs, Secretary of the Electoral Board.
David Levy, Chairman of the
Steve Troxel, Vice Chairman of the Electoral Board.
Greg Berry, citizen.
Rod Ware, Judy Farrow, citizen.
John Fatser, Lynchburg Republican City Committee.
Peter Sepharadi, I'm just here for the refreshments.
Okay, Cora Separati, I'm a citizen.
Michael Walker.
Jeff Rosner, Lynchburg Democratic Committee, Authorized Representative, and Voter Protection Liaison.
Thank you all for coming. We'll move on into approval of the agenda and the minutes. I think you should have a copy of the agenda. If you have this, I move that we adopt the agenda as proposed.
Second.
All in favor? Or opposed?
I looked at it earlier.
Yes, the same one. And we have the minutes from the February 6th, 2025. No board is there any readiness about those minutes. Okay. I move the adoption of those minutes.
Second.
All in favor? One opposed? Okay, they are approved. Now, Dan, would you like to make your terrific announcement?
Actually, my announcements are part of my registration report, and that's on the last page, so I'll defer to that point.
So,
Time for the registrar
report?
Okay.
Okay, let's start from the beginning here. This is a registrar's report for March 6, 2025. We have, as part of my report, some statistical reports, budgetary reports, some ongoing projects reporting, and finally some announcements that I have. First, statistical report is a registering counts by locality. As you can see, similar to or from last month, the inactive voters have been run down to low numbers because anybody who was inactive for 2 federal elections was removed January 29th by the Department of Elections from the rolls, leaving us with the numbers that you see here. The military, overseas, and federal breakout is not an addition to, but it's included in the all. It's just a breakout so you can see what that looks like. Total number of voters in the locality down at the middle row at the bottom, 57,110. I want to make a quick note that we are in the process of doing the NCOA mail out, which is to determine whether or not we get a response from those who are undeliverable and sometime during the past year. And when they don't get response, when we don't get response and mark them as active or mark them, they will be moved automatically to inactive status. This means that the inactive numbers that we see here today by the next report will climb up again, including those who are no longer reachable by mail. So just a heads up that the inactive numbers will change. We also, in part of that process, do have the Department of Elections cancel out-of-state voters. And so that will also bump down our active voters and possibly some are inactive as well. So we'll see where the numbers end up, but just so you know, that process is ongoing. And they'll pull the trigger on that on March 12th. Any questions on that report?
I'm just curious, if we know any reason why, I could understand Liberty having the most inactive, but they only got 150, we get 4 precincts that have over 200. Any thoughts on why we have so many inactive and what amounts to not Liberty precincts?
I think it's, all of these inactive numbers are actually relatively low. And what you would expect is that because they do the purge of the rolls, every federal election for those who have been inactive for 2 federal elections, that kind of indicates that you would kind of cut in half, at least anyway, every cycle, the number of inactives that are there, assuming that the Department of Election does the proper job with this NCOA mail out and actually moves people from active to inactive status appropriately. I don't know if that answers your question, but I guess for me, 200 inactive seems like that's not a high number against the 5,000 or so
Yeah.
voters in that precinct.
It just struck me as interesting, and I probably didn't need to ask the question. It just struck me as interesting. And, you know, 3-5 has got, what is it, Cornerstone?
Yeah.
That's got a lot of Liberty, so, you know, and then, so let's go on.
Delegate, I noticed you might have a question. We don't normally take
I
questions.
think the registrar may have answered that. So I've just received about 1,400 new registered voters from the previous election. As customary, I always send out a letter to every new registered voter in the city, welcome, you know, as a representative, things like that. So out of that 1,400 approximately that I received, is that an accurate number for next month? Is that going to change?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I guess I'm assuming that the source that you got those voter names was from the Department of Elections by purchasing that as a candidate. Am I getting that correct? Is that right?
That's where it came from.
Yeah,
You know.
so it depends. These numbers are always in flux, right? So it depends on maybe when you purchased that. My feeling is that we had a good uptick of voter registrations during the November elections. Like if you look at the numbers from month to month report, you'll see that we had a really good jump, you know, before the November election. So if you have purchased a list prior to, I mean, if you go back to the list prior to that and then this list, I would expect to see more, you know, a higher number of voters. If you purchase that list after January 29th, it should have shown the purge numbers. If you purchased it before the 29th, it probably didn't show the purge numbers. Now, I'll talk about this more in the next meeting, but the Department of Elections process about doing their sweep to purge and also do their NCOA, it's a little hiccupy, shall we say. So, you know, I'm reluctant to say exactly why the numbers are different, but those would be my suppositions as to why you would see what you see.
Well, Dan, there were, in your report here, the DMV took in 1,755 new voters in February. So you see an uptake of that number.
Well, this is helpful because we received the list in mid-February. So that's what I'm trying to determine is if there was purged old voters, who are the real new voters and things like that. So this is helpful. I appreciate you sharing this.
Yeah, and if you want to come into the office, we can talk further and more about specific dates and whatever I can help you with. Any other questions on this report? Locality statistics. This is for, oh, I'm sorry, this is month of February. Apologies, it's a typo there. February. And essentially, this is by precinct, what went in and what went out under various categories. Probably the most important column here is net change, which is the column to the right there. And that just shows you kind of per precinct which direction we went during this last month, up or down. And this includes all voters, active and inactive. And so it's, just gives you a sense of kind of which direction we're going with each precinct. Any questions on this report? Okay.
Moving on.
We also have the one that Doc mentioned a minute ago, or maybe it was David, the February statistical report. You can see our total in was about 1884. And this breaks it down across what the source of the registration is. So you'll notice that almost always the DMV is our biggest source. This is because of the motor voter. Everyone who goes into the motor vehicles office to do a transaction there at this point in time is automatically marked for registration. They have to opt out if they wish to opt out. And so those applications come through to us, and every month we need to process, those applications. It is a sense, it gives you a sense of where the applications are coming from, and also, how many applications that we process across the month.
But the fact is, it wasn't 1,700 brand new voters, right? It was
So-
people changing their address, buying a different car, going and getting their real ID.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's a fair point, that anytime you do something at the DMV, unless you opt out, it will force a voter registration through to our office. And many times people are already registered, so then nothing, and maybe it's because they changed their address, right? So that's fine, so then we update our address in our system or whatever, but yes, to your point.
And it's not necessarily true, because 2 years ago, when I renewed my driver's license, I checked, I don't need to register to vote. And the girl said, "Are you sure you want to do this?" I said, "Yes." I still got a letter from the office with my voter registration card. So the DMV doesn't even respect my wishes.
Yeah, the DMV has some
Correct.
issues.
We
I
can't
just like
search
going there
legislative
too.
like you don't.
Yeah, Okay, any questions, other questions on this report? Thank you for your focus study on some of the details here. Thank you. Here's our budget for where we are. This is a budget performance report for the year. And this just gives you kind of all the different categories which we're budgeted against, and then how we spend. Apologies, it's a little convoluted in terms of the size of the print. By the way, I do put this into a PDF. It is up on the website, so I generally publish that prior to the meeting. If you have a nice phone or a laptop and you want to, expand it on your screen, you can do it that way. So if it's hard to read here, you're able to do it yourself on your own device.
Is this through the end of February?
This is through, I think I put the date on here as of March 3rd. So yeah, it's through the
Oh,
end of
March
February.
3rd, okay.
I don't know that I paid anything out the first couple of days of March, but anyway. So yes, this is through the end of February.
So we're 2/3 of the way through, and if we have spent 66 or 67% or less, then we are on tap with that.
Well, okay, so this is page 1, and it gives you for each category over on the right-hand side, this is where Doc is going. On the right-hand side, you'll see the percentage that we spent of the budget that we've allocated. And if you have any questions on this, I'll stay here, but otherwise I'll keep moving on to the other pages. Okay, page 2 finishes up the registrar and also starts the electoral board. By the way, just so everyone understands, we get a total budget for the electoral board and the registrar. From the city's perspective, it's all kind of one big pot, but they do have us within the system break it out into 2 pots. Part of the reason for that is because the electoral board has certain things that they are more responsible for. They handle election officers and different things like that. They pay for ballots, they pay for certain things, and the registrar's office pays for other things. Sometimes on the same budget, category, but on a slightly separate budget. So at the end of the day, it all wraps up together from the city's perspective, but we do kind of have a breakout of two different categories besides the subcategories you see here. So the electoral board here is down at the bottom. And if you have any questions here, I'll just pause or I'll go on. The final page gives the number that I think Don was aiming at, which is at the bottom right here. You're going to see we're about 86% between the registrar's budget and the electoral board's budget, about 86% of the way through our budget. So we're running a little hot. And the reason for that is because we had a big election. We spent a lot of money on ballots. We spent a lot of money on election officers. Elections just cost some money, right? There's not really an easy way to save money in a big election like that unless you want to risk running out of ballots or some other disaster, so we're not having enough election officers. So we didn't run that risk, but it means our budget, we're running hot in our budget. If we weren't going to have a June election, we'd probably be fine, but since we do have a June election and that takes place before the end of the fiscal year in July, July 1, June 30th, July 1, it's a turnover from fiscal year. So we will probably overrun the budget while we're doing the June election. That's probably going to be the case. So just a heads up. We'll have to figure that out as we get closer to the end.
Dan, what are the consequences at the end of the year if we run over budget in terms of?
So that's a good question. I actually have it on my list of, my to-do list to pick up the phone and call city administration, just, give them a little bit of a heads up so we're not, running into a surprise. I do note from the previous administration that there were times when they overran the budget by $40,000, $50,000. And that's could be, where the range that we're in for this one, depending on how much this election costs. It should be within about $60,000 for this size election. That's my estimate. But there is a process to do a fourth quarter budget adjustment, which actually takes place after the end of the fourth quarter of the fiscal year. So my guess is that possibly they'll recommend that we try to square it up by putting in a budget request after we know what the final number is after June 30.
I think also we need to, in our next meeting or so, start planning for informing the city about our budget for next year and the year following, because we're going to be living on borrowed time on the books.
Yeah, we've actually already been required to submit a budget, unfortunately, for 2026. They required that. I stalled as long as I could to see how far we would know,
Right.
but I had to submit that by December 4th. So that's actually in play. And at this point, I think if we were going to, change the numbers, we would need to go talk to somebody to try and make that adjustment. Now, we don't know what that poll book investment's going to be quite yet. And that was why I couldn't include it in our budget for, budget submission.
That's for 2025.
So 2026, actually. So 2026
Starting
starts
July 1, 2026.
starting July 1, 2025. So it runs in advance, right?
Okay.
So when we finish the fiscal year 2025, fiscal year June 30th, we'll start the fiscal year 2026, July 1.
Well, we may be able to get through to June 30th, 2026 without having to buy full.
Right, so one of the things I'll talk about in my report in a couple more slides is kind of what I recommend we try to do and, put it to your good graces to kind of think through that, knowing all the factors that we have to think about.
Right, exactly. But yeah, if we can develop relationships. I was very impressed at the meeting you and I went to this week with their command of the detail. And so we'll feed that into the.
Yep. Yeah, we can talk more about that. I was impressed also, and I have some thoughts about that.
Good.
Any other questions on this, on the budget? Okay, let's talk about poll books. So a review of where we are. Electoral Board has at this point had the opportunity to review two poll book vendors. One was ES&S. And the other one was, I just lost their name. They had the iPads. Okay, I have their name here somewhere. Anyway, I'll think of it, but you've had there's 3 poll book vendors that are certified in Virginia. You now actually have touched, or seen all 3. And the one we have now is now CalvaCare, used to be called Demtech, now called CalvaCare. And so those, between that poll book software that we use now, and those other 2, you've kind of seen what's available. Now, our present poll book provider, CalvaCare, has given us a free software update, which they're going to give us later this year. So I would like to see what that's going to, when that's going to come out. They haven't given us an exact date, nor a full feature, update list. But I would like to, I will continue to chase them on the timing and on the content of that. But my recommendation is, before we make a final long-term decision, like an 8-year type decision, that we at least see what that software package looks like. Then we'll really have a full rounded view of what the poll books that are being offered. Our poll books right now are slightly short of the recommended timeline for end of life, but will fall out of OS support by the end of the year. So they're sitting on Windows 10 on a laptop. A preferred platform by a lot of localities is the poll pad, which would be either a Surface, Windows Surface, or the iPad. I think it's be a good idea, by the way, for us to take some kind of a survey of election officers and see what their thoughts are around this. The poll pads, I think, are smaller, lighter, but they have an on-screen keyboard, which may be good for some people, may not be as good for some others. They also are so small and light that they may actually fall off a table or be hard to handle, or walk out of a precinct, God forbid, right? So there's other things to think about with security and also comfort level of our officers.
We can lock those pull pads down. Most of them have,
A stand of some kind.
well, they've got a slot where you can stick a chain in on the side, a cable, and take it down and wrap it around something so it can't walk away unless somebody actually gets out a cable cutter. I like your idea about talking to the chiefs, and I was wondering if there's any way we can get the chiefs to come in, maybe have a side-by-side demonstration. I'm hoping that both vendors will be at the Viva conference, because I'd like a side-by-side demonstration. And yeah, and then if we could get that and just let our chiefs come in and tell us what they think and get their recommendations, I think that would be an excellent way of making it work.
Is the poll pad one that uses the cloud for storage?
So both poll pad solutions right now do use the cloud for storage of voter credit, right? So the distinction is that with the ballot scanners, they never touch a network, and therefore their integrity within their own computing environment is just on that device. The Department of Elections has permitted the poll book side of things, which is the other piece of data, right, which is segregated, of who's voting, who gets voter credit because they've come up to vote. They permitted that to be stored on the cloud, so that is an approved method. Clearly, we have a lot of people have some nervousness about the use of the cloud. CalvaCare does not use the cloud. The other 2 vendors do. So just
They use it in different ways. The second vendor we saw had a much more limited cloud exposure, I thought.
yes, I think we can definitely, obviously, as we continue the conversation, we can, and I didn't for this meeting put together a, set of features and check off the different features for each one. But I think that, that matrix is something that we should definitely look at before we get to our final decision.
Well, we 3 are going to Viva, and we certainly will compare
Yeah.
the machines.
Yeah.
It was no ink. Was
Oh,
the-
no, that's right, thank you, yes, no.
Okay.
So anyway,
That is going to present some timing issues, because we do have a fairly sizable election in 2026. In the
Yeah.
fall of 2026.
yeah,
And that is going to be important to focus on.
yeah, so for what it's worth, if you want to make a decision at the beginning of the year, right, or the end of this year, right, maybe you can time it. If we decide we're going to stick with the current poll books through June and November of this election, then you may be able to get to another election, set of poll books.
Well, I think we're pretty much aiming toward getting through this year.
Yeah.
Through 2025.
Okay, and then that's basically my recommendation, coming out of the bottom of the slide here, is that I think they've given us, our present poll book vendors have given us a support agreement, which I've shared with you without discussing the numbers publicly at this point. You've seen that, and I recommend we go ahead and get that support agreement for our next two elections, which would be the June election and the November election, and then we're covered in terms of support. And then at the end of this year or beginning of next year, we go ahead and make a move to, a decision about whether we continue or we go to some other platform.
Just out of curiosity, Calvin Care is the one that's the present vendor?
That's correct.
Okay, and are they coming up with a new poll book solution?
So because we have software purchased with them, they're offering us a free upgrade to the software. My guess is they're trying to bring some of their product in line competitively with, other vended solutions. Since the software we have now has been on our poll books for a few years. So I think they're trying to stay relevant, stay in the mix. I don't know what, we have to look and see what they actually do, and what the feature set is and how it changes.
Well, the other problem is that Windows 10 is expiring in terms of support in
Right.
October.
Correct. So,
And that is a key event.
yes. Now, for what it's worth, since our poll books never touch the internet, they never do receive regular updates on the OS software. So I agree that we should be cautious about extending beyond a certain point with software that's no longer, operating system software that's no longer supported. But at a practical level, it's probably not a lot of difference.
No, you're right, and it's not a make or shake.
Right.
Make or break game.
But going forward, I think, and the, all of the vendors will support a poll pad style, right? So Calvin Care will support a Microsoft Surface, just like ES&S will support.
So if we change the physical equipment,
If we decide to change the physical equipment. And by the way, one of the things that I thought about was actually purchasing a few copies of the physical equipment and getting the software we have today, port it over to that. I'm pretty sure we could do that. And then we could actually try out, a poll pad type of poll book, even in a live election, right? We could pilot that and see how that worked. So if we had a chief, you were talking about, having the chiefs try this out. We could maybe have them try it out in advance, or we could even have some who are adventurous try it out at an election, right? So just
That may be
some
possible.
thoughts.
Well, it would be a case of which poll book and which vendor are we going to try out if we buy a couple of them. My other question on that last bullet, are we just kicking the can down the road and just putting off an expense, and how will that benefit if all we're doing is putting off an expense?
So the answer is yes, we will be kicking the can down the road. And the expense is a fraction of the new poll book solution. So the rationale for kicking the can down the road is we don't have to go back to the city and explain to them why we are making a purchase that's, on the order of what we just did with the,
Yeah.
with the scan.
So I guess I'm just trying to think in terms of why it's in our best interest to kick the can for another year than to go ahead and bite the bullet. And what I'm hearing is just good interaction with the city and not hitting them up 2 years in a row for heavy duty, because code requires them to fund what we need. So what we're doing is we're buying a little bit of time for the city in the budget. And the other thing is we're giving ourselves time to figure out what we're going to do, because this contract is only for 1 year at this point. I'm just wondering about price increases and, and we've also got longevity going on, because if we buy it this year, is it gonna need to be replaced a year sooner than if we buy it next year? So I'm just trying to verbalize these questions.
Here's another way of looking at it. Our present vendor is in the state of flux.
Yeah.
And we just don't know if they're going to make it. The second vendor we saw, the second one we saw, is getting marketplace share, but does not have as large a marketplace share as the first vendor we saw. But we're not as convinced of that first vendor's solution as we were of the second vendor's solution.
Correct.
It will give us more time to see how it shakes out in the marketplace and with the state elections. We are not under an order to change our equipment yet. And we can persist. We've got trained election officers on the present board. So I think we're in a decent position right there.
And I don't have a problem with any of that. I just wanted to verbalize and, out of the bouncing around into, we put it into words.
Well, the delight is that we have three competitors who will try to keep the price in a fungible way that's competitive.
Trust me, as long as we have three vendors and a public decision to make, I'm happy to play them against each other a little bit and try to make sure they're honest with us.
That's good.
And I'm more than happy to let you.
Okay,
Thank you.
moving on.
All right. The next item is the emergency backup polling place and the continuity of operations actions. I think we will talk about both these things, part of your agenda later, but I just wanted to update you with information. So I gave you a backup polling place matrix on February 6th. This was the matrix where we decided to try to double up with existing locations for the most part. We did have one additional, shall we say, entrant for a backup polling place, which Betty suggested for a sort of Methodist church. I did reach out over there and I've not heard back. It does look like that congregation is not a young congregation. So I don't know their urgency to serve in that manner, but let's see what
I just want to
happens.
use the building, I don't want to use the people.
Yeah, I know, I know.
Yes, we do. Get through forms and assign them as election officers.
Yeah, yeah,
It's just a backup.
yeah.
I don't care. We'll put them any place we need them.
Okay.
So anyway, so you have that in front of you. We can ponder that. You can ponder that. I would like to get a kind of a decision as to, yes, we're going to go forward with this plan by the April meeting at least. And the reason for that is because we will need to update some polling place agreements with those that we've selected backup, because right now, the polling place agreements say where we're going to do the polling place, and, it's defined in there, and that's for insurance reasons. And if we addendum and add another polling place, we can put addendum one there. If we do that, James Hall informs you, the city risk management guy informs the insurance, informs me that we will be covered with our present insurance, with an insurance certificate. But we would need to have that kind of in writing on those polling agreements in order for that to come. So that's something that we should obviously get done by the June election. So if we can move on in that, that'd be great.
So in order to make the decision at the April meeting, we need to find out, one, whether Forest Road Methodist Church is available.
Yep.
Two, whether the other locations we've looked at are amenable to the idea of having 2 precincts in their location.
Yeah.
Um,
And we'll sign that agreement, right?
Do we have to go ahead and approve the early voting continuity of operations signed by April or?
I think that's a separate action, although I would like to move that in parallel.
Yeah,
If we can.
I think we need to have that as quickly as possible, but as long as it doesn't keep us from voting on the April meeting.
Yeah, I think they operate independently and we can decide on the 2 tracks independently.
Yeah,
The other one that's a little bit in flux is Liberty University. I did get a voicemail back from Kenny Craig. I sent you all an email to reply to him. And it seems like he's just hoping that a couple generators will work, but my feeling is that, Montague Borough has to have power if we're really gonna have a precinct there, because you have lights, you have an elevator, you have,
Yeah.
and if you have well, they literally had a fire alarm go off in the election, so, in June. So fortunately, there's only 6 voters in that precinct in June, so it wasn't a huge impact, but if that happened in November, if you can imagine what that would be like,
on top of everything else,
right?
we would have had a circuit court telling us to keep the doors open.
Yeah, so we need to have a good plan from them, in my view, of what we would do
Yeah,
in an emergency. And so far, we haven't got a solid answer on that.
Well, I think your email was very appropriate. I like the direction we're going in. I think you can get it together by.
yeah, I mean, I think we're in good shape where we can approve at the April meeting almost everything that we need to approve.
Yeah,
Just, we have 3 questions, which is Forest Road. Which precinct would that be?
that's like, more.
404. So we have 404, 302, and the early voting site are the 3 that,
Exactly.
I think we're probably in pretty good shape to get everything else done. So if
And by the way, if you guys approve it and somehow we still have some straggle that's not, fully lined up, we'll just keep chasing that until we get it lined up. I mean, that's fine.
Okay, let's move on to.
Yeah, and we'll move on to that, but just you all, at least 2 of you had gone through that walkthrough through the library, right? So I gave you, in your packet there, an email that I would hit send on, I've not done that yet, to the city administration.
It looks appropriate.
Okay, all right. Let's see. Projects, security update in the registrar's office. Cameras are in place, and as you saw, I think you stopped by the office today and saw the counter improvements are underway. So that is, I know they have a hard deadline of May 2nd to clean up and get out of there and get it all done. So it looks like they're gonna make it, hopefully.
he told me today that he thinks they'll be done by the end of this month.
Yeah, that would be good. We did a separation of duties exercise. I've marked it closed in the projects here. I know, Doc, you're still turning that into a policy document, but I expect that to reappear when that's finalized and you guys are ready to make that a regular policy. Page program, I'm entrusting my 2 wonderful deputy registrars to coordinate and organize that. So they'll be reaching out to high schools and other, most of the high schools to go ahead and see if we can get some engagement for pages for this elections this year. The backup precinct review and approval, we've talked about that. Poll book renewal replacement, we've talked about that. Precinct 301 relocation and precinct 203 relocation. As you're aware, that's on the city council agenda for March 11th. And so I'll be representing and happy to invite you guys along if you wish to represent that to the city council on March 11th. And I will, once they approve that, Matt Friedman is queued up to send in the letter for the Attorney General for no contest and, or no objection, I guess. And I will submit the tickets to elect to change the polling places. FVS scanner recalibration, we had a scanner that was acting up on the last election. I've had the vendor come out and recalibrate that. That's all in good shape now.
Question on that.
Sure.
When they did the recalibration, did they find an actual problem or did they just hope they got it?
They felt that the way the lid was closing on the scanner, it was not correct, it was loose or not correct, so they tightened stuff up and, we.
So there was an actual problem or an actual thing that we said, we think that this particular thing was what caused it and that is fixed.
That's to the best of our knowledge, yes.
Oh, okay,
Have we ever done anything about the high-speed scanner?
We have not used the high-speed scanner again. We can revisit that if you wish in our, now we've moved to a model of using 4 scanners for a cap overall. And that has been okay. But if you want to revisit that for, an upcoming election, you can certainly do that. Up to you to let me know what you think there. Decommission of OVO voting machines. So with the OVOs, we still have them physically here. I've gone through the paperwork to decommission them. At some point, I will actually send the ones we're not going to do anything else with for destruction. I know, David, you're planning to take 2 of them over to our friends over at Matthews Academy.
I'll pick them up in the next 2 weeks.
Yep, so they're there for you. Less certification, I sent you the documentation on that, the annotated spreadsheet. I did submit the first, tranche of that, or the first attestation by March 1st. And then we can look and have a session, we'll talk about the details of that, closed session, wherever you feel appropriate to do that.
Should we set that with our next meeting in April?
Yeah, I think that's fine. If you want to do a pre-hour prior to our regular open meeting or something like
So
that.
for the notice of the meeting, we should have a notice of it.
Yeah, if you decide you want to do that.
do we need to approve anything prior to the April meeting?
I'm sorry, I said, I do need to submit actually the remediation by April 1st. It's just reminding me. So
But
maybe
do we need to approve that before you submit it?
Technically your attestation comes on May 1st. That's when you finally say, yes, this is our plan, we agree, we're signing in blood, whatever. So you have the information. I can go over it with you individually or in a meeting, or we can do it in April. If you're comfortable with me submitting a remediation plan before we look at that. It's up to you.
Any pleasure of the board?
Not that I'm happy with having extra meetings, but I think it would protect Dan if we took a look at it before he sent it in. So maybe if we could have a closed session the last week of March and just, put our eyes on it before Dan sends it in.
And I can answer a question. If you do look at that sheet and have questions, I can answer questions in advance. If you choose it.
Is that the time that we can also do whatever it is we have?
Yeah, so I think, the way the schedule works is I need to submit a remediation plan of
Right.
anything that we didn't answer yes to
Right,
by April 1st.
right.
I don't know that any of the answers that I, sent in the initial thing are really going to change. Maybe the commentary against them, like all the comments I gave you as to why we're doing, why we answered the way we did, I have to strip them out and just give them yes or no's, right? But in the remediation plan, I have to give them, well, this is why, right? Or this is what our plan is to fix this. So you kind of have a halfway version of that in your head.
The question though is, if we have a meeting before we submit the remediation plan, do we need an additional meeting before the 1st of May?
Nothing will change, as far as I understand, nothing will change from the April 1st to the May 1st. Because remember, I don't think I submit the actual document.
And we don't get any feedback.
Right, and I think you submit a letter that says, and I upload that letter to the letter. So it's not, I don't even think after the April one, there's any more, less specific documentation, just saying, hey, this is our affirmation of
We
this.
can revisit that in our April meeting, but what I'm hearing is that if we have a called closed meeting at the end March, that should suffice.
Yeah, I think so. I believe so, yeah.
Does that make sense? Good.
Would that be too early to do the voting system security program?
If you wish to review it at that point, I can certainly prepare it at that point if you want to try and follow up. That was
We can
the,
get it out of the way, the happier I'll be.
yeah, that's not due until August 29th, but I know you probably don't want to be looking at that in August if you can help it. So if you want to, advance our work on
What
that.
is in August?
The VSSP,
Oh,
voting system
that's a
security.
completely different one.
Right.
Yeah,
So ironically, the LES and the VSSP do dovetail. Some of the things that are in this list also, you're essentially affirming that you have what you have in the VSSP for some parts of it. So it's not completely orthogonal. There is some overlap.
now we've got Viva that, like 22nd, 23rd, 24th. So I don't know if the board would like to get together like on Thursday of that week for the closed session and cover all of the security certification, as much of it as we can get done. But that would allow you to send in what you need to send on April 1st. We can prove everything else, sign the letters, and have that totally out of the way, not have to worry about it again, and neither would you.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. You're thinking of something, Tom?
Okay, let's do that.
So we're tentatively planning now to meet on the 27th of March.
Yeah, and 4,
That's fine with
For
me.
closed session.
Yeah.
for the closed session.
Okay, the last thing on my report is just the announcements. This is just a reminder that we have this public hearing with the city council March 11th for 203 Moving Great Brookfield Church and 301 Moving to West Lynchburg Baptist Church. In case everybody doesn't know, there will be a primary election for both Democratic and Republican parties on June 17th, so it will be a dual primary. Early voting begins for these elections on May 2nd. The purge of voter rolls was completed on January 29th. The NCO mail out, which will change the rules again, is underway now and will conclude on March the 12th. And then we submitted the LESS on March 1st. Okay, and that's my announcements.
Thank you. I don't think we need a motion to accept your report. We very much appreciate it. Hesitancy of moving to own business, relocation of the polling places and update.
No hesitation, I think we've already discussed relocating the polling places, we're basically waiting on city council.
Things happening and the is the actual adopting the relocation. Okay. Electronic poll books, we discussed. Any other discussion on that?
Well, they're going to have public comment on the 11th. They're also going to vote.
Yes.
Yep. Okay.
No, we'll be out of town.
Okay, let's move on to new business. Betty, would you report on the
Yes, I've given you all a list of 17 names of people who have applied to be election officers. I contacted the party chairs and got approval for them from both party chairs. I also made a note here that once we approve these 17, we'll have 87 that we've approved so far this year. And we estimated at very minimum, we need 90 to have 5 people in our precinct. We really need more than that. But also in the last couple of weeks, I've mailed out 63 applications. Hopefully a large majority of them will come back and increase our ranks as we move forward. Anyway, I would make a motion that we appoint these 17 election officers.
second? Further discussion?
I'm ready to approve this list, and then I have a question.
Okay, well, that's sort of out of order, but.
Well, we are approving these for 1 year. My question is going to do with how do we go about dealing with the 2 and 3 year appointment? Well, that's what I'm going to ask about. I figured this was a good time in the agenda to ask that question.
Okay, so we're approving the motion is to approve these for 1 year.
To appoint.
To appoint these for 1 year. Any unreadiness now? All in favor? It's passed. Now, would you like to comment on the 2 and 3 year issue?
Well, I don't like having to get applications from all of our election officers every single year. It's unnecessary, especially when you have people that come back every year. And we have a number of them. I think 1 year appointments should be used for people who, it's their first year, or for people who we may think need some remediation. I think we can go 2 years for people that have a track record with this. And there are some people, particularly our chiefs, if we're happy with the chiefs, who we can go 3 years on. But I think for most people, other than the 2 categories that I first mentioned, we should start looking in terms of doing 2-year appointments.
We haven't had a policy in the past, is this correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
It's just traditionally 1 year appointments.
You said 3 years?
He was suggesting that possibly.
I'm making the suggestion. I think we might need to just come up with another policy and say, this is how we're going to do it.
I think what you're suggesting is a policy as opposed to just an ad hoc.
One-time decision.
Yeah, so we ought to reflect on that and maybe put it on the agenda for next meeting. And we even talk to other electoral boards to see if they have a
See what their policies are.
Exactly. I'll reach out to some of them.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm not even going to say only chiefs would have the 3 year, because we have some
Right.
very solid election officers that are just as consistent as can be. Some of which refuse to be chiefs. But
Nobody here. Yeah, okay, so, good.
continuity declaration.
Exactly.
Okay.
Any discussion of the continuity of operations plan? That's what we discussed.
Just for the sake of those who are in attendance, we are concerned about during 45 days of early voting, if something happens that we are unable to use the registrar's office, a train wreck, for example, where do we have early voting?
Or a fire.
For some reason, we're unable to use the registrar's office for early voting. We have to have a plan for continuity of operations. And David and Trish and Dan and I were able to go down, and the old library space in City Hall is currently being used for storage. There is no permanent call for use of it. They've got a couple of temporary offices in there because they're remodeling someplace else. But it looks to be a good space if we can work out the details we need to work out with city administration. So that's what this is.
So, yeah, we're proceeding with that. Dan, you're working on the detailing of that to see if it's actually going to be available. And we've come up with an overall plan of how it would operate. It has certain issues about
Access.
curbside voting and handicapped access and that sort of thing. But it's a good space and it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it would just require adequate signage so that people will know how to get to the space.
Parking.
And parking.
Parking would be a great thing.
Really?
That's what everybody says.
Yeah, all the ADA people can park up behind the police station and come down the steps. That would be fun.
Thanks.
There's an elevator.
I woke up the audience.
We have a better plan,
Okay, all right.
you know.
Sounds about.
Okay, do we need any
That
more?
was such a great reaction.
Do we need any more discussion on this?
I don't think so. We'll revisit it the next meeting.
Okay, shall we move on to public comments?
Yes, sir.
This is the moment in which the public is able to speak. Are there any comments from our assembled personages?
Well, I'm totally impressed with all the details that go into an election and the way you're all handling it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Just got, I'm impressed too. I just have one little question here.
Sure.
It's a dumb question.
That's all right.
Just please state your name. I think we're on.
Oh, I'm sorry. John Vassar from the ever popular Lynchburg Republican City Committee.
Occasionally.
All
Depends upon who you talk to.
right. I'm John Vassar and you're not. All right, here we go. I'm seeing this DMV 1,755.
Yep.
Okay, is there any, because, you know, we live in a world with a lot of travel, and say Ivan Ivanovich comes over here, and wants to get a Virginia driver's license, he's not a citizen. He gets a Virginia driver's license, and he's just trying to be a good person, get a driver's license, you know?
So,
And, you know, how do you keep him from getting on the voter rolls?
yeah, so, this is a good question.
You read Tolstoy, don't you, Ivan Ivanovich?
Yeah.
Okay.
The, so I don't have a full answer to that question. I actually have an ongoing exercise with the Department of Election right now about our DMV feed. So, by the way, Election Board, if you get a call from elect telling you to fire me, please don't listen to that. Because
You gave them our number.
I never listen to anything they say anyway.
I'm asking questions that might not make me popular, just to let you know.
That's why we hired you.
Yeah, so we'll have to find a way through to the end of that. But the voter ID that the non-citizen gets is a different ID than the driver's license. However, it's not that different, right? You have to look at it carefully. Betty actually knows all the details about how it's different, right? Backside has temporary on it. We actually do in our training some, yeah. or doc-
And
doc- yeah, doc-
excuse me, could you project for John?
Yeah.
He's.
Yeah, sorry, yeah. So, when election officers are checking IDs, that's kind of the final stop as to whether or not someone can vote. So they need to look at the license, if there's a restriction on it. They need to look at the other side to see what that restriction is. And if it says it's a temporary ID, they're not allowed to use that to vote. So that's kind of the final stop. I have some questions about the DMV feed, which are not just limited to this, but have some other questions about it. And I'm talking to the Department of Elections about that now. So maybe I can answer your question more fully by next meeting.
No, thank you, thank you.
One question.
Sure.
What does,
Your name for the record.
I'm sorry, Jeff Rosner, Lynchburg Democratic Committee. What does NVRA stand for?
National Voter Registration Act. So this is, and the National Voter Registration Act defined how you could register to vote. Basically, defined all these different agencies that would supply voter registration applications. Although the motor voter, I think that is really the reason we have so many in the DMV is because that's a Virginia statute that creates a motor voter.
Which, and again, it doesn't mean those are all new voters. But if you were to change your address, you'd have to fill out a complete voter registration form. So a lot of the numbers on that printout that Dan provided in his report, that's just making corrections to a lot of voter information, as well as new voter information for people who change, county to city or, come in from out of state. So those would be the new ones, but moving from Ford Avenue to Boonesboro, that's not a new one, but it is an input from DMV. I mean, a name change, somebody got married. So that would all be, that's in that number, but that doesn't mean those are all new.
Yes, sir.
Peter Sefrati. Got a couple of things here I want to ask questions about poll pads. They have keyboards on the touchscreen keyboards, but you can get cheap Bluetooth keyboards that will work with them if that were an issue.
So the challenge there is that they've disabled Bluetooth on the knowing poll pads. The reason is because they are concerned about security, someone hacking the poll pad. So they have, by design, not permitted that particular function.
What about a corded port connection?
I think we raised that with them, and I don't think we got a great answer, but we can certainly investigate.
There's certain limited peripherals that could be attached.
Yeah.
For instance, a driver's license reader. But otherwise, it's very circumscribed.
One of them, I think, has a driver's license reader built in for that reason.
Yeah, but you can't use it.
I'm not sure, at least one of them, basically the only port that I remember seeing on was power. So they may not, I mean, they're very limited for the very reason of making sure that nobody's accessing those except the people that are supposed to access them. And I can assure you that everybody running down this side of the table is very aware of making sure that we have a pristine system in that regard, or as much as is possible with what Elect allows us to do.
Okay, you talked about the cloud storage for the, is that for the poll?
The poll book data, correct.
So does that mean that there's no more, whatchamacallit, what's the name of the sorcerer guy? Merlin, there's no more Merlin?
Correct. So Merlin is a feature that's used to network the CalvaCare style poll books. And that allows the poll books to communicate. In the case of the knowing, they use a proprietary Apple communication system. And in the case of the Surface, they would actually, I think, have like a Merlin-like device, maybe not quite as heavy duty.
Yeah, that was my understanding.
Yeah, a Merlin-like device in order to keep the poll pads in sync.
Well, because I was just thinking cloud storage implies wireless internet connection, right?
So the way this works is if you, on election day, you would be ring fenced within the precinct, meaning your, say, 3 poll pads or 4 poll pads would communicate with each other in the precinct and nowhere else. But you would bring that back to the office, and then, in the office, we would upload the data.
It's not contemporary.
Right, and in early voting, so this is where they actually use the cloud. Some localities have multiple sites for early voting. And so because of that, so the voter can't go to one site and vote and then go to another site and vote. They have to simultaneously keep that data up to date. So in those cases, they would have a poll pad that is connected to the cloud on each end. And they would communicate via the cloud for that purpose.
Well, the reason I brought that up is that because every polling place, you be at the mercy of whatever kind of wireless connection they have. And for instance, at my polling place, we got there and there was no internet connection. And so it was a school, so everybody was closed. There was a maintenance guy there. So they had to call somebody, and then eventually somebody had to show up and turn on the internet. So I see that as maybe getting kind of messy.
No problem, yeah.
Right,
No,
well,
this would not require.
Just point that out.
And it's my understanding that any cloud interaction would only be for the poll books. The ballot scanners themselves are still distinct.
Right, right. And then you were talking about poll update, operating system updates for the poll books, and because they're not used very often, they're not getting updates, can't they just be pulled out and updated?
So what we've done in order to prevent any kind of software intrusion is we've isolated all of the poll books from ever touching the internet. So you say you had to get the internet turned on. I sure hope that wasn't for the poll books because the poll books are
No,
not.
it was for.
You understand what I'm saying? Because the poll books are not supposed to touch the
Right.
internet. So even in my office, the poll books don't touch the internet. The only way
I didn't know you could actually connect them. I thought that was,
Well,
like,
they-
the hardware would include that, but
yeah, unfortunately,
don't tell them.
it's, yeah, okay. But anyway, they connect to the Merlins and that's where they connect and that's what they're supposed to connect to.
Right.
And there's no way to update the operating system or the software via that method, so.
Okay. And then, you know, you were discussing putting off updating equipment and because it's gonna be pretty expensive, et cetera. And I seem to have heard someplace or read someplace the last couple of days that there's talk in Congress about changing, making changes in federal election regulations to mandate this, or, you know, this and that. And I don't really know exactly what they're talking about, but it might be a good idea not to do anything right away because what you buy might be illegal.
Well, this is true. This is true. We're in a state of flux.
Yeah.
Maybe in that respect.
Limbo along with what we have. Let's live
Although
along.
I think that's more foreseeable what they might do or what they might not do. To enact nationwide changes will cause every state in this country probably to have problems. And we will, I'm sure they, even Congress will be sensitive.
And I could be wrong, but I think that Congress can only make laws concerning federal elections.
But obviously, they're not gonna have two systems if you have state elections. at
The next
same-
federal election is not until 26 anyway.
Yeah, I had a conversation with the Department of Elections about this question as well. Because if the SAFE proposal goes through, it does raise the question of bifurcation of the voter rolls between state rolls and federal rolls. And they have no, I mean, they don't know what's gonna happen and they don't have a plan right now for that, but.
Right.
But
I think a lot of it is like paper ballots, which we use paper ballots anyways, right? That's considered paper ballots.
Yeah.
The electronic ballot marking, that wouldn't affect us at all. But I don't, you never know what else the changes are.
Okay, any further comments?
That's enough.
That is
Good agreement.
Dinner's calling. Happy hour.
Okay.
Happy hour.
So do I hear a motion to,
You hear a motion to adjourn.
All right.
all in favor?
Aye.
As unanimous.
There's 10 minutes left. You're welcome.
Record to go